The white dress still hung on her body when they turned the key. Adaeze heard the click of the lock like a gunshot to the chest, sharp, final, and impossible to unhear. She pressed her palms flat against the cold wooden door of the guest room and screamed until her voice broke, until the ivory lace at her wrist was soaked through with tears, until the sound of the wedding music downstairs swallowed every syllable of her desperation whole. Nobody came. And somewhere below her, in the grand ballroom of the Okonkwo estate, beneath a chandelier dripping with white orchids that she had chosen, her best friend, Chisom, was walking down the aisle toward the man Adaeze had loved for 3 years. It had begun so beautifully, the way all disasters do. Adaeze Nwosu was 26 when she met Emeka Okonkwo at a charity gala in Lagos. He wasn't the tallest man in the room, nor the loudest, but he had a stillness about him that drew her in like gravity. He listened when she spoke, truly listened, leaning forward slightly, his dark eyes steady, and in a world full of men who only waited for their turn to talk, that felt like a miracle. Within 6 months, they were inseparable. Within a year, he had met her family in Enugu. Within 2, he had gone on his knee in the same garden where her grandmother used to grow peppers, and placed a ring on her finger that caught the evening sun like a small captured star. "You are my home," he told her that evening, and she had believed him completely. She had also believed Chisom. Chisom had been her best friend since secondary school, 15 years of shared secrets, borrowed clothes, midnight phone calls, and a love so sisterly that Adaeze had never once thought to question it. When Emeka proposed, it was Chisom who screamed the loudest, who poured the wine, who stayed up until 3 a.m. helping plan the dream wedding neither of them had ever stopped imagining since they were girls drawing bridal gowns in the margins of their notebooks. What Adaeze did not know, what she could not have imagined even in her worst nightmares, was that Chisom had been meeting Emeka privately for months. Not as a friend. Not as a wedding planner. But as a woman quietly, deliberately rewriting herself into someone else's love story. The morning of the wedding, Chisom had arrived early. "Let me help you get ready," she said, standing in the doorway of Adaeze's bridal suite with a smile so warm, so familiar, that Adaeze had simply opened her arms and let her in. They laughed over breakfast. They played old songs. Chisom did Adaeze's hair the way she always had, with that same careful tenderness, and when she handed Adaeze a glass of water and said, "Drink, you need to stay hydrated," Adaeze drank without thinking twice. The dizziness came on slowly. Then the heaviness. Then a darkness so thick and sudden that Adaeze barely had time to call Chisom's name before the floor rose up to meet her. She woke up in the locked guest room 3 floors above the ballroom, her wedding dress still on, her bouquet crushed beneath her, the music already playing below. She understood everything in an instant, and the understanding was worse than not knowing. No one heard her screaming. Or perhaps someone did, and looked away. The ceremony lasted 40 minutes. She counted every one of them in a prison of white lace and silence. When the music swelled for the final time, that triumphant, soaring note that she had rehearsed to in her bedroom mirror 100 times, she slid down the door and sat on the cold tile floor and stopped screaming. There are moments in life when grief outgrows the body's ability to express it. When tears feel too small, and sound feels too small, and all that remains is a hollow, ringing stillness. That is where Adaeze went. Deep into that stillness. And she stayed there. It was a junior housekeeper, a young girl named Titi, barely 18, who eventually unlocked the door, 2 hours after the reception had begun. The girl's eyes were wide with terror and guilt. Someone had paid her to keep the door locked, she whispered. She was sorry. She was so sorry. Adaeze did not go downstairs. She walked out of the estate through a side gate, still in her wedding dress, carrying nothing but her phone and the ruins of who she used to be. She called her cousin Gozi, who came without asking questions, who wrapped a blanket around Adaeze's shoulders and drove through the night without the radio on, because some silences are sacred. The years that followed were not easy, but they were hers. Adaeze left Lagos. She took a position at an architectural firm in Abuja, threw herself into work with the obsessive energy of a woman who understood that healing and building are not so different from each other, both require you to start from the ground up, both ask you to trust a structure you cannot yet see. She designed schools and clinics and community centers. She poured everything she could not say into blueprints and foundations and load-bearing walls. She did not speak to Chisom. She did not speak of Emeka. She carried those two names the way you carry an old scar, aware of it always, defining herself against it rather than by it. What she did not know, in those years of quiet rebuilding, was that the house of cards Chisom had built on her betrayal was already beginning to tremble. The first crack appeared 18 months into the marriage, when Emeka's mother, a sharp, cathedral-proud woman from Nui who had always adored Adaeze, discovered a series of messages on Chisom's phone. Not love messages. Business messages. Chisom had been in contact with a rival of the Okonkwo family for years, feeding them information, leveraging her access to Emeka's world for financial gain long before the wedding. The marriage, it became clear, had never been about love. It had been the final move in a long, calculated game. Emeka's mother told him. He did not believe her at first. The mind protects itself from truths it isn't ready for. But when his lawyers began pulling threads, the full tapestry of deception unraveled with a speed that shocked everyone. The second crack was worse. Chisom, in her confidence that she had won, had grown careless. A former mutual friend reached out to Adaeze one afternoon, a woman named Blessing who had been at the wedding and had always held a stone of guilt in her chest about what she had witnessed and said nothing about. Blessing told her everything. About the sedative in the water. About the housekeeper. About the months of quiet maneuvering before the wedding day. For the first time in 4 years, Adaeze wept, not from grief, but from the staggering, complicated relief of being believed. She did not go looking for revenge. She went looking for a lawyer. The case was quiet but devastating. Adaeze pressed charges for the drugging, for which there was medical evidence, and Chisom, faced with the weight of documented proof, eventually confessed. There was no dramatic courtroom moment, no cinematic confrontation. Only paperwork, and testimony, and justice delivered in the dry, unglamorous language of consequence. Chisom lost everything with the quiet efficiency of a life built on sand. Emeka's marriage was annulled. It was Blessing who arranged the meeting, though she did not tell either of them that the other would be there. She invited Adaeze to a small dinner at her home in Metoma, in the easy, casual tone of old friendship, and when Adaeze arrived and found Emeka standing by the window in a Greek kaftan, looking older and somehow smaller than she remembered, she nearly turned and walked back out. She didn't. They talked for 3 hours. Not about the wedding, not at first. About work, about the city, about the strange grief of losing your own life to someone else's choices. Emeka did not make excuses. He said the only thing that might have mattered and probably still wasn't enough: I should have known. I should have looked harder. I am sorry that I didn't. Adaeze did not forgive him that night. But she did not close the door either. Trust, once shattered, does not reassemble on schedule. It rebuilds the way bones do after a break, slowly, in ways invisible to the eye, stronger in some places and forever tender in others. Adaeze understood this. She was an architect. She knew that the most enduring structures were not the ones that had never been tested, but the ones that had cracked, been repaired honestly, and learned to bear weight again. Over the following year, she and Emeka moved around each other with the careful respect of two people who understood what was at stake. They did not rush. They argued sometimes, and sat with the arguments rather than running from them. They built something slower and more deliberate than what they had had before, less dazzling, perhaps, but far more load-bearing. On a quiet Tuesday evening in December, no orchestra, no orchids, no guest list, they stood in the garden of Adaeze's grandmother's old house in Enugu, the same garden where he had once proposed, and they exchanged simple words in front of only family. Adaeze was green. She had never looked more like herself. Years later, when people asked her how she had survived it all, the locked room, the betrayal, the long and lightless aftermath, she always gave the same answer. She said, "I didn't survive it. I built my way out." There's a difference. And in that difference lived everything, every blueprint, every scar, every quiet morning she had chosen herself when choosing herself was the hardest thing in the world. Some doors are locked by others. But only you hold the key to what comes next.